Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. We are on episode 50 of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles, and I just want to say thank you to all my listeners and viewers of the podcast. We've had some exciting guests on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, starting with Justin Levine of the Puck Authority. We've brought on Doug Smith, the Toronto Raptors writer for the Toronto Star. Bob Elliott, the Hall of Fame baseball writer covering the Toronto Blue Jays. We've had several writers for The Athletic, including Andy McCullough and Dan Pompey, to Caitlin McGrath and Alex Coffey. But today for episode 50, I've brought on one of the most respected Canadian sports journalists, and that person is Stephen Brunt, the multi-platform journalist for Rogers Sportsnet and one of the co-hosts of Writer's Block on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. In this episode, I chat with Stephen about co-hosting a radio show with no live sports during the pandemic, his early days as a sports columnist for the Globe and Mail, covering the world's biggest sporting events, doing video features and video essays, as well as his advice for young journalists looking to break into the industry. As always, the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now, without further ado, let's get to episode 50 with Stephen Brunt of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's 50th episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Stephen Brunt. He is a multi-platform journalist at Rogers Sportsnet and one of the co-hosts of Writer's Block on Sportsnet Fan 590. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And, Stephen, I'm going to start off because what a strange few months it's been for you. You were in Florida in March covering spring training, and then you come home because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then you and your co-hosts, Jeff Blair and Richard Deitch, have to host a 2-3 hour radio show without any live sports to talk about. What's this challenge been like for you as a journalist?
It's been strange. I hope it's the strangest thing I go through. It's, like we did sports after 9/11. I was involved doing radio then and working for the newspaper. That was a different kind of challenging circumstance, and we were, on the air through that. But yeah, we were the Rudy Gobert night, that we all remember. Jeff and I and Kevin Barker and my son were sitting at a bar in Clearwater Beach smoking a cigar, watching the game on TV. And in the midst of our week of radio in Dunedin at spring training that Jeff and I do every year. And, the game, we knew that stuff was happening, and, the virus news was certainly starting to circulate, and the Tom Hanks thing had happened. But then I remember looking up and saying, look, they stopped the game, something's happened here. And that, that kind of horrible, ominous feeling that night walking back to the hotel. The next day, we watched what turned out to be the last spring training game in Dunedin this year, which was the Jays playing the Canadian Junior National team. The rest of the team was in Bradenton. By the Friday, they had padlocked the gates of the stadium, and we were doing the show from Ben Wagner's condo lobby in Dunedin. And then bugged out of there. Jeff left Friday night. I left Saturday morning. It was a very strange time. It was very normal in Florida to a fault. Restaurants were all full, beaches were full. We jumped on the plane to Toronto, and I came back with my son and went into quarantine. And the Monday morning following that, at 2:00, we were on the air from home, three of us, with the technology trying to. I've got a tie line, so I was in. I've had this for a while, but we were trying to figure it out, make it work, and to talk about sports when there were no sports, and just talk where we talk about the shutdown for the first couple of weeks, and we just. I don't think any of us, I think the first break any of us took was 9 weeks in or something, 10 weeks in, right? Where one of us would take a few days off or a week off. So yeah, it's a different kind of challenge. And, I'm not sure what the content was like for people. We did our best. We had tried to have really good guests. tried to be smart. People aren't in their cars. Like, that was the other thing. You have the sense that no one's going to work, especially in the first few weeks. So I think a lot of our audience was podcast audience more, or maybe people at home just trying to get through the day. And it's I say, like, nothing I've ever experienced. I'm very relieved the games are coming back, because I think it'll give us a bit of a second wind, but it has been a real challenge for the three of us.
Well, I mean, I've been an avid listener, and you guys have done a great job. And I think it's,
Thanks.
interesting just how, you're right. I mean, you have to bring on the guests, and you guys, talk off the top about, the different issues and provide your perspective of being in the business for so long. But Stephen, this is such a fluid situation. Like, back in March, you're thinking, oh, is there going to be sports in 2020? Then you go to a conversation about, well, there'll be sports, but with no fans. And now in some parts, like, they're considering some fans back in stadiums. So it must just be, for as a journalist, just, being on your feet and being willing to be adaptable is also a challenge too in your role.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely. Remember when baseball shut down, what they initially said was that opening day was going to be postponed to the 15th of April. So none of us saw it playing. Well, this is uncharted, right? So I remember doing a hit with Tim and Sid the last Friday I was there before I left, and Donovan Bennett was on, and Donovan asking me whether I thought it would affect the CFL season, and I said, look, man, if it gets to that point, we're in a lot deeper here than I think we're going to be, because they don't even report to camp until the end of May. Well, look where we are. So yeah, I think it is. The story has evolved almost certainly day to day and week to week. I always thought that they would play because of the money. I thought they would play because of the money, that if there was a way that they would play. And, watching, where we're watching Taiwanese baseball and Korean baseball, and then the Bundesliga and UFC and, WWE and all these other things find ways to start and figure out protocols. But I was, look, on one hand, you don't want to be there, you don't want to be cheering for something that would be bad for public health. But on the other hand, again, I was just trying to be realistic about what I thought was how it was going to unfold and why it would unfold. And I don't think it's a bad thing if sports resume, as long as they can do it, within this new world. They're not taking any more risk than the rest of us are going to be taking anyway. We are going to be assessing risk for a long time now, because I think in times like this, as after 9/11, as during World War II, it serves a purpose. Maybe the purpose is to distract people from the daily bad news, but I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like so many of us are torn, right? We want sports to come back. It represents a sense of normalcy, but at the same time, in the backdrop, we have this pandemic that's still, in the United States, which is the center of the sports universe, many states are spiking in COVID numbers. And while people say, well, I want to tune that out and watch sports, as a journalist, you can't tune that out. And I feel like a lot of the stories that are going to come from the return to sports will always have that COVID-19 operating in the backdrop, because I think they will start sports, but whether they'll finish is another question.
Yeah, sure it is. But it's not just a question. Like, I think one of the things that I pushed back on during this whole thing is the idea of separating the kind of health and safety protocols in professional sport, which is just another entertainment business, from the health and safety protocols and the reality of living through this and working through this that other people are going through in their normal lives. Like, so rather than wringing our hands about athlete safety, which look, it's fine to talk about it, but unless you're going to talk about migrant farm workers and people in meatpacking plants and people in long-term care homes and the people who sell us our groceries and sell us our booze and deliver stuff to our doors, this is a reality for workers and all, and we do want people to get back to work, because if people don't get back to work, we're not going to have anything left. So, it's, again, managing risk. I think standing up and kind of taking a high moral position about sport specifically and saying, well, they can't do this, they shouldn't do this, but then going and eating a hamburger that was prepared using meat by the poor buggers in, the Cargill plant, I'm not sure that's a morally defensible position. That's me speaking for me. But So I think we have to look at this holistically, and look at sport holistically as part of this pandemic, and look at sport as work, as commerce. Just be realistic about it. It's a business. And, I don't think it's any more wrong for baseball to be played than it's wrong for restaurants, patios to reopen. We're going to have to live.
Mhm.
And if you're waiting for zero, if you're waiting for complete safety and complete assurance, you could be waiting for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
We manage risk in our daily lives all the time. This is putting it right in our face in a way that we don't normally worry about getting hit by a bus or, getting cancer or having a heart attack. But the truth is, we're mortal, and we're at risk at all times. This is just, a very public manifestation of our own mortality. So one of the things I've been trying to do is, make sure we don't pull sports out of that context. Don't pull sports out of the real world context, and, talk about the people whose health has really been affected more directly. And, not just in terms of testing positive, but in terms of dying.
I want to shift gears and talk about your career. And you've been in the
Okay.
industry for over 30 years, and you graduated from the University of Western and then were an arts intern at the Globe and Mail in 1982. Before sports, covering arts and news, how did those beats prepare you to become a sports columnist?
Yeah, I did want to be a music writer, and I did that for a while, and I loved it. I still love music. Still, the thing I'm missing the most during this pandemic is live music, to be honest. That's one thing, and I don't know when I'm going to get to do that again. I wasn't a sports guy. I the sports fan, but I never worked in. I didn't even at the university paper, I didn't cover sports when I was at Western. I did a little bit of radio, goofed around on radio and sports, but nothing serious. And I wasn't one. Most people who are sports reporters of my ilk, my generation, were always sports reporters, right? That's what they dreamed of becoming. They became, and they worked their way through, and they became sports reporters. That's all they did. I went into news because that's where there was a job. Came out of J school, did undergrad at Western, did J school at Western. There weren't any jobs. I did hang around the globe kind of as a freelancer, and after I was a summer student, and then some jobs opened up in news. And because I'd gone to journalism school, they were willing to hire me as a news reporter, but I never really done it. And I did it for a while. I guess 5 years, something like that. And often I covered politics. I was on the federal election campaigns, provincial election campaigns, a little bit at the Ledge, a little bit of police reporting, a little bit in the courts. And I think, and then I didn't really cover a beat in sports. I went right to writing the column. I wrote features for a while, but I didn't actually ever cover a beat in sports. So I came at it from it was a weird trajectory compared to most of my contemporaries. But I do think the grounding that I had covering news, came in really handy. In some ways, because of the evolution of sports journalism during those, we covered a lot of real world stuff in sports, or we increasingly, economics and labor and politics and all of the real world stuff was part of. It wasn't just the fantasy anymore, and the stuff that was pioneered by guys, prior to me, guys like Robert Lipsyte, who started covering sports in a social political context. And I probably went overboard doing that early in my sports journalism career, to be honest. But I think it did prepare me to, cover collective bargaining, and bring kind of a new sense to it, or cover police cases or, legal cases that involved sports. Because I was really grounded in that stuff, and I knew how to do it. I knew my way around going into a courtroom and covering a court case. And it's, amazing how many times that has popped up over the years, that we were, not covering the games, but covering something outside the games.
Well, for sure, and certainly your knowledge of collective bargaining helped this year during the tumultuous MLB and MLBPA negotiations. But Stephen, of course, you spent many years as a columnist, and I'm curious, what do you think goes into making a successful sports column?
Well, I can only speak for me, and again, I honestly, and I figured it out. Like, I had guys who I admired and I read, and who were real role models for me and mentors in a lot of cases. Guys like Milt Donnell, the late great Milt Donnell, the Toronto Star, Trent Frayne, people who were very kind to me as well. But I didn't know what I was doing, and I was trying to do something different and trying to do my own thing. And as I say, I think if I look back on the beginnings, it was pretty awful. But it did evolve into something that was my own. And, I kind of came up with my own set of rules for it. And, like a newspaper column, which is kind of it's ancient history. Newspapers are going to be ancient history soon. But, 750 words, but, a single idea, a single thesis, it's got to be, it should boil down to a debating point almost, to be at resolve point. You need to know what the column's about, which sounds dead simple, but a lot of times if you actually read some stories, you realize that they're about a million things and not about anything. So it was kind of, drilling down to find that core idea, that core argument, being true to your own point of view, trying to write stuff you believe. And, you can write in a lot of different ways. There are a lot of ways of getting into a column and handling that 750 words, but just the basic rules of beginning, middle, and end, as though you were making an argument, set up your argument, expand on your argument, conclude your argument. It kind of rewards concise, precise writing. And look, writing has always come easily to me, which is nice. I was fast on deadline. We used to write to horrible deadlines. And, but I think that, there is a rhythm to language too, that, you have to have an ear for, and good writing, kind of has a rhythm and a pattern to it. And the value of words and the meaning of words, the weight of words, you have to respect that. Sometimes you run into stuff that's just kind of word salad, and you say, this is not, there's no rhythm to this language, and the words are kind of, the meaning of the words has been lost here or has been misinterpreted. So I always tried to write things that I could read. If I was going to read it aloud, it would read aloud well and clearly, and in a, in any kind of a rhythm and a pattern. It's almost, which is why, like when I write scripts now, it's a different kind of writing, but it's exactly the same thing. You have to be able to write something that you can read. And I think a good column, you should be able to almost read it aloud as though it's a script.
And speaking of that rhythm of words, I found one of your old pieces that you wrote after Game 7 of the 1997 World Series when the Florida Marlins won. And look, some stories like that, when you're trying to capture a big moment, you may focus on a play or the score, but you focus on none of that. And I'll just read the lead here right now. And it says, "Baseball, for all of its problems, for all of its flaws, for the way it can be so often be its own worst enemy, proved once again last night that it can still deliver. A 19th century game can still provide thrills near the dawn of the 21st century, no matter how badly it is managed. It can because at its heart is a simple, complex, occasionally perfect game that is beyond corruption." That's just a beautiful lead to a story and to talk.
I wish I remembered writing it, but I was probably on a horrible deadline, so I was probably just typing. But
no,
yeah.
But it just speaks to just like, you could focus on a player or just like the score, but that's, to me as a reader, is boring. You take a different approach, and I'm just curious, what you think of writing, on those tight deadlines in those big moments.
Yeah, it's the greatest. Like, I don't have to do it. I'm actually kind of happy I don't have to do it anymore the way we used to. The hard deadline, the real hard deadline, which was about when the presses started to run. Like when they actually printed the papers. As soon as we had an online presence in newspapers, that kind of went out the window, and we were on perpetual deadline instead. But you have to kind of. It's a learned thing, but being able to stay clear. I always think of it as staying clear, which sounds like Scientology, but going clear. But you're trying to stay clear in the moment, and you need an idea. You need an idea. It's got to be and again, a kind of a thesis, and then you needed to kind of if you've got 20 minutes or 15 minutes to write a column, which sometimes was the case, or even almost less, where you're just typing. You needed to kind of just flow through you. And for a deciding game in a World Series, maybe there was a play in that game that probably could have worked on. But I think I was working with the beat writer in that case would have been maybe Larry Milson or whoever I was covering that series with. And, I know they're going to do the nuts and bolts of the game. So I need something else. And the other thing is, in the practical sense, like, I don't have time to go down to the clubhouse, work it, talk to a bunch of guys, come all the way back up to the press box, and then start fresh. Because we at the Globe and Mail didn't have that kind of leeway with deadlines. We were we were almost game over on deadline. So, it kind of forced your hand, to say, okay, I've got to do this myself. And I learned, it's one thing I did kind of learn early on was not to be a slave to the post-game quote, because most of them are terrible. And you rarely actually learn anything. They're just punctuation. So don't go down there trolling for a column in a clubhouse or a dressing room, because it almost never works. You better have your column already. And but it's, when you nail it, when it flows and you nail it and you hit it on deadline, it's the best feeling in the world. You're over the moon. I remember when in '96 at the Olympics in Atlanta, writing off the opening ceremony, and I had filed a column, I forget what it was. It wasn't very good, but I filed something just to kind of get it out of the way so the desk had it. And, there's a million things going on. And that was the night that Ali came out and lit the torch, lit the cauldron. No one knew he was going to do it. And I was with Jim Christie. We were actually not even on site by then. We were somewhere else. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I got to write. I got 10 minutes, but I got to do this. So I could just scrap everything else. And he found me a place, he found a phone line that we could file on, because in those days, that's how we did it. And I just started writing. And, that column's, it's pretty darn good for something written in 10 minutes. I got a lot of history there and a lot I could draw on with Ali. But, when you nail it on deadline, you're 6 feet off the ground, but it's hard, and it's hard for a lot of guys. I think it's physically hard. I think it leads to a lot of bad lifestyle stuff when you're doing that late at night. I'm proud I could do it, and I think not everybody can do it, but I'm glad I don't have to do it anymore.
Well, speaking of Ali, you wrote a book, Facing Ali, which was, a national best-selling book, and I'm just curious what it's like to write a book on one of your childhood heroes.
Well, it was, I didn't want to do just another, I was working with an editor then who kind of brought me back into books. I'd done some books early in my career and I was out of it, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And Diane Martin was the editor, who was the publisher, Knopf actually, and Knopf Canada. And she said, why don't you how about an Ali book? And I said, look, what am I going to add to, there's a million Ali books and there's some really good ones. And I don't know that I've got anything to add. And we kind of, between us, kind of hatched the idea of, but what if you talk to the guys he fought? And, it turned into a different kind of project. And I realized very early on that it would work, and that the stories of those guys were kind of contained and different enough and powerful, and that, if you took 15 of them and kind of put the puzzle pieces together, you got Ali, you got a different Ali, because you got the Ali through the eyes of those guys. So the concept was really important there, and look, I had a ball meeting all those guys, and in a lot of cases, kind of the last real interviews with some of them. So I feel it's kind of like a historic document, that book, it was the best way that I could have written about Ali. I'm not sure that I wouldn't have just taken on, I say it's too big a subject. He's too big a subject, and other people have done it pretty well. So I was happy to have my little corner.
No, for sure. And when you're writing books on, athletes where there's been multiple books, you're trying to find that unique angle, and it can be difficult, but I think you did a really good job, like you said, finding that little corner. Stephen, you said how, you're many years as a print columnist, you're writing those tight deadlines, and then you transition sort of as the industry is transitioned into more digital, web-based journalism, where now you're writing on web, you're on the radio, you're on TV, and you're also doing video features. Was that transition challenging for you? And when did you feel like you could get a grapple on, going on those different properties at Sportsnet?
It took a while. I was doing radio way back. I started doing radio a long time ago, and when I was at the Globe, and that took a little while for me to really get comfortable with it, to be honest. And I dabbled in radio way back in the day before I ever went to the Globe, and I found it really hard. I found it hard working to a mic. I was really tight in front of a microphone. But yeah, I got comfortable doing prime time. Because the fill-in guy or the third guy, working with McCown and Jim Hunt over the years. Then I started doing, the odd TV hit. I had a Canada AM gig for a while with Jim Hunt that came and went. I had some News World stuff, CBC. I did TVO. I did Studio 2 on TVO for 10, 12 years, I think. Bits and pieces, but always as the newspaper guy, And I think I didn't really start to pivot until the Vancouver 2010. When I started, I had kind of a writing gig there, but I didn't really have much of a writing gig. I was writing for the Olympic website, but we were part of the Globe was part of the consortium, and I did a couple of pieces there. And I gotta say, Nelson Millman, the ex-PD at the Fan, and guy who was with Sportsnet then, helped me out a lot, kind of liberating me and kind of as giving me permission to perform. Because it's not just about writing, it's about, you've got to act, you've got to perform, you've got to use your voice, and kind of it's not a read, and he, when we were working on those Olympic things kind of on the fly, I think the first couple of my reads were pretty stilted, and he came to me and said, look, you've got to let it go. And that was enormously important, because it like if you're a newspaper guy, part of the whole ethos of being a newspaper guy in the old days was that you're not the story. You step back, you have a byline, but like I never used the word I at the Globe and Mail ever. I was the Milton L tradition, no first person, right? I never wrote first person. And the idea was that, I created this thing, but the thing's not me. You can react to this thing I created, but it's not about me. And with performance and broadcast, you're front and center. It's different. So you do become part of it. And I had to kind of become comfortable with the idea of I am a performer as well as the other stuff I do. In a lot of ways it went against the grain, but I did. I got comfortable with it, and I learned how to write scripts. I'd written some before. Like I wrote I worked on a feature documentary called The Last Round for the NFB about the Ali Chevalier fight, and I wrote that script for that feature doc. Colin Linden ended up narrating it. Mm-hmm. But so I had done some of it, but kind of learning the art of writing a 2-minute script or a 5-minute script or a 10-minute script, and then sitting down in a studio and performing my own stuff. It's a different set of skills. Completely different set of skills. I really enjoy it now. Like I like it, and I like what we can. I like the collaborative aspect of it. I like working with creative people. I work with great producers, shooters, editors, sound people. Like it's a team thing. Way more of a team thing. Newspapers are a lone wolf. It's a lone wolf activity, but it's really collaborative in television, and I love that part of it.
Well, when my social media followers knew you were coming on the show, a lot of them asked me to ask you about the Vancouver 2010 Olympic essay that you wrote, which has, been, such a famous video essay. And Stephen, I'm just curious whether it's that video essay or your recent Charlie Montoyo feature, Nino de Oro. What goes into, producing and, narrating and performing those really exceptional video pieces?
Yeah, really, those two are really different, right? Because the Vancouver one was just spit and binder twine. It was just me and Matt Dunn, the producer and the editor, putting it together with no resources, really. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of clicked, and the music, the heroes out of the soundtrack, all of those elements just fell in. It was a moment, and it was emotionally true in that moment, and it worked. It changed my life, that whole thing. That changed the entire course of my career. But when you set out now, we do these like the Nino de Oro, which was, a feature-length doc. I'm working with a really good producer and a shooter in Puerto Rico and in Tucson, and it's a 22 minutes, but there's a kind of a different rhythm, 3 acts. and you're kind of thinking about the arc of the story, and a lot of that story some of it you discover along the way. Like we knew a little bit about the story, Charlie's story in Puerto Rico, but we weren't totally prepared for what we ran into down there, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think we've those long form docs we've done around the Jays, because we've had really good access and we've dealt with some people who were really good subjects. You're able to get some texture into them. You can't do it in a 2.5 minute piece. So I think you got to know Charlie, or Russell Martin, or Marco Strada, or Aaron Sanchez, or things went haywire for Roberto Osuna, but Roberto Osuna, when we went down to Sinaloa and shot with him, I think you really do kind of you can reach people with that kind of material in a way that's hard to do with a written piece. There's a power to television, to video, to whatever you want to describe what we do. But there's a power to it that, like, I can do things in the written word that I can't do. Like I can be more nuanced. When we did the thing on the Guerreros, on Vladian Junior and Senior, the written version of that has some nuance in it, between the line stuff in it, that the television piece doesn't. So it reads differently. So it's hard to do that, but the kind of visceral impact of seeing and hearing, and taking people to exotic places, man, you can make people feel things.
No, for sure. And it also helps to have your voice, Stephen, and have your pipes when when making when performing those pieces. And I'm just always curious, because there's obviously a proof of concept where you're pitching the idea to producers and your bosses at Sportsnet, and then once you get down there, you may have an idea of where it's going, but then after interviewing the subjects, it can go a completely different way. So again, it goes back to just being adaptable as a journalist in producing these features.
Yeah, you have to. I always say when I'm with because producers' job is to think about making sure they get the shots, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure we come home with the stuff. We got to come home with the shots. And so they're always thinking about, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this. And my line to them is always, because my job is basically to observe, to do the interviews, and to figure out the story. Mm-hmm. And I always say to them, you got to let the story happen. Don't impose I know we have to have a plan, but don't impose the plan on the story, because the story is going to come out of this. We'll have the story when we're done, but don't miss it by trying to structure too much and trying to. So it's a push-pull, because again, they've got a responsibility I don't have, which is to make sure they come home with the stuff, and I don't know how to do what they do or what the shooters do. But yeah, a lot of the time the story emerges. Most of the time it does, and you've got to be ready for it when it does. You've got to be listening. It's like doing any kind of an interview. The most important thing about doing an interview is listening to people. Not going through your questions from 1 to 10, but listen to the answers. It's a hard skill when in broadcast, when someone's talking in your ear and all of that. But the best stuff always is unexpected. It's the answer you didn't think, and where you say, "Boy, what do you mean by that?" It's always the best question. What? Tell me more.
No, for sure. And you're doing interviews right now in your series Open Invitation, and I currently attend Centennial College graduate sports journalism program, and one of my profs is your colleague Shai Davidi at Sportsnet. Mm-hmm. And interviewing is that, right? Like when I started doing interviews, of course you list the questions, but the best interviews are where you do the research, but then you just let the conversation happen. And of course it's different for different mediums. Print's different than broadcast, but the same elements apply when talking to people.
Yeah, the only difference is when you're doing it for television, you have to be more precise. Mm-hmm. You have to understand, especially if you're on camera. You have to have it all in your head. You have to have a little bit of time sense, and then still engage with the person. Print, you can be a lot more loose. Obviously you don't have to worry about that stuff. But yeah, a lot of it is just the same principles you would bring to having a conversation with someone. It's exactly the same. Being that kind of an active listener and engage and make eye contact and smile and try and close the distance. Try and find common ground. It's human stuff, right? And when it works, yeah. But I'm learning the part about for a television interview, I'll have reams and reams of stuff that I've written down for myself, and then before I sit down to do it, I chuck it, because if I have it, it's a crutch, mm-hmm. and it'll actually take me away from what I've got to do.
Last two questions for you, Stephen, and one of them is from one of my Twitter followers, Christopher Bradley, who asks, while doing research on his book, Searching for Bobby Orr, what is the one thing Stephen learned about Bobby that surprised him the most?
Oh man, I learned a lot. Yeah, it's Bobby's a complicated guy, and I'm not going to claim that I have fully completely understand him. Obviously, it was an unauthorized book, so but there's never going to be an authorized book about him where he's going to reveal much because he's so closed and private. He's an extraordinarily guarded guy, and that goes right back to his childhood in Parry Sound. But yeah, I think it was just about trying to kind of crack that nut to understand his, the kind of the layers of his relationship with Al Eagles, and to kind of get back to the guy from the kid from Parry Sound who kind of felt like a hick going to the big city and a little out of place, and the layers of defense that he built around himself over the years to kind of protect himself from the world. He's again he's my favorite hockey player, best hockey player who ever lived as far as I'm concerned. But there was this kind of cartoon version of him out there, and I tried to get to the human as much as I possibly could. It was a hell of a challenge.
And finally, Stephen, and I always ask this for all my sports media guests, and that is, what is one piece of advice you give to a young writer or a journalist looking to break into this industry? Obviously, it's a very challenging time, but I mean, if you love stories, I feel like telling stories, there's a place for you.
Yeah, there is. Like, telling stories is still the core of it, whatever the platform is, right? That's it does come down to telling stories still, and it's more important than, your technical or statistical knowledge of sport is the ability to tell stories. Now, not everybody, has that talent naturally. But yeah, I think being able to write still, I'm biased, but I think being able to command the language is incredibly important if you can do it, because a lot of things spring from that, no matter what medium you're working in. If you can command the language, you can do a lot of stuff, and you can generally find work. But yeah, it's pretty hard to kind of tumble into a career path now. You kind of have to invent your own. Now you can create content on your own now in a way that I couldn't. We didn't control the means of production when I was coming along. You had to work for somebody. You guys have the advantage now, and I do think it's an advantage that you can create content. Just you don't need a printing press. So that I think having, not waiting for the system to absorb you, kind of trying to either create your own system or force your way into the system. Be bold and be creative, and I still think there's room for people who are good. I know there is. And guys like me are going to be, walking into the sunset, and, people are going to come behind us. There are a lot of good young journalists out there. It's just that they're going to come from a different place. No one's going to get the beauty of the newspaper thing is we got to travel the world and see things on someone else's ticket. I'm not sure that's going to be an option anymore. And it's too bad, because so much of what I do is drawn from that experience. But no, I think there are jobs for storytellers still.
Stephen Brunt, he is a multi-platform journalist on Rogers Sportsnet and a co-host on Writer's Block for Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me on the 50th episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
All right, my pleasure.